The Department of Health will recommend an easing of a number of COVID-19 restrictions, including reviewing regulations in travel and tourism, to the National Coronavirus Command Council. Health Minister Dr Joe Phaahla told a media briefing that this would make it easier to travel in and out of South Africa and help guide the reopening of social activities, especially in the leisure and tourism areas. Joining us now to discuss this is Tshifhiwa Tshivhengwa, the CEO of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. Mr. Tshivhengwa, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to The Full View.
Thank you for having me. Good evening to you and your viewers.
This is certainly welcome news for the tourism sector in particular, isn't it? Which was the hardest hit by the pandemic and the subsequent restrictions. What's your reflections?
No, indeed, it's welcome news. It's long overdue. We have been talking about easing of restrictions for inbound travelers and also certain things within the regulations that we have to make sure that those that want to travel to South Africa are able to travel at ease, and also to sort of turbocharge, the tourism recovery strategy that we've put in place. So it is important that we move with speed so that we are competitive. If we don't do so, many other destinations like our neighbors, Botswana, have already eased some restrictions that are quite important in order to boost their inbound tourism.
Now, take us through some of the restrictions that you were hoping will be eased and how those directly affected the industry.
Well, the first restriction that we want to be eased immediately is that of PCR or negative PCR requirement for inbound travelers. These are travelers that are coming into South Africa who are fully vaccinated. We are saying that it should be easier for them to travel to South Africa. Provided that they're not showing any symptoms, we should not require any PCR certificate that shows that they are negative. So in other words, they should be allowed to travel into South Africa using their vaccination certificates, and we should not ask for anything else, including antigen tests, because these are the travelers that we want to come to South Africa because they are fully vaccinated. The second part of it is that, the children that are under 18 years of age that are traveling with their parents, of course, they should be able to travel into South Africa without requiring any PCR test or any vaccination, because it's not in our vaccination regime at the moment here in South Africa. So if we do those two things, and the third thing is South Africans that are traveling outside of South Africa that are fully vaccinated, when they return to South Africa, at the moment we require them to have a PCR test. What we are saying is that if you are a South African, you travel outside of South Africa, and when you're returning and you're fully vaccinated, you should not require any PCR test to enter the country, provided you don't show any symptoms, as the regime is here in South Africa. Of course, if we do these things, those that are fully vaccinated that want to travel in and out of South Africa should be able to do so in a smooth way. They should be able to add to the tourism economy, create employment, or get those that are sitting at home because they've been retrenched. They may be able to come back to work because the industry will pick up in a speed that we want it to pick up. So if we do those things, we will be able to get more tourists from our source markets, in Europe and the USA.
But Mr. Tshivhengwa, would that not be treading in murky waters? I mean, on the issue of the PCR testing, is it not risky? Would it not be treading on murky waters? Because it essentially means that you'd be welcoming tourists and visitors who are COVID-19 positive. And, scientists, you and I know that have said that in the past, being vaccinated does not mean that you are not able to spread this disease.
Now, look, we won't be doing, anything that's outside of science if we do that. If you look at what we are currently doing here in South Africa, we say that if you don't have any symptoms of COVID, you should not even test. So bringing someone from outside of the country who does not have any symptoms of COVID, why do we require them to test when they're coming to the country, whereas we here in South Africa are not, required to test? COVID is already here. It's not as if we're going to be importing something that's not here. It's here, we've been living with it, and if you don't have symptoms here in South Africa, you're allowed to go on with your lives. So we need to do the same for those that are coming into the country that don't have symptoms, that are fully vaccinated. They should be able to travel into the country without any PCR test. Of course, if you're not vaccinated, you have to produce a PCR test. But we need to make it easy for those that are vaccinated, because we're promoting vaccination, for them to be able to travel easily, across the world because they're vaccinated. Of course, if you get, symptoms, you got to go through the procedure, of going to be tested, and you have to do, other things that are related to that. But what we're simply saying, if you're fully vaccinated, from anywhere in the world, you're not showing any symptoms, there is no need for you to have a PCR test. And that is what we're doing here in South Africa currently.
Yeah, and tourism in South Africa is not considered an essential service and therefore fell within the category of services that had to remain closed down in the early stages of the pandemic back in 2020. I suppose then that that classification has been problematic for the industry, as South Africa has traditionally relied on tourism for the promotion of local economic development, job creation and the uplifting of the standards of the livelihoods of communities. So are you at all looking at proposing to the government to declassify the industry as a non-essential sector?
Well, first of all, we need to look at the industry as an industry. So tourism, as we speak now, it touches, various aspects of the economy. There are, hotels and accommodation, there are restaurants, there are many other things across the value chain. Some of them touches transport, including, if you look at the airlines, look at car rental companies and many others, that are related to that. So what we need to do is to make sure that when we quantify tourism, which we're already doing, we make sure that we put together something that says this is how big this industry is. Yeah. And the fact that we employ on a pre-COVID about 1.5 million people, we are over 400 billion rand industry. We impact the economy pre-COVID 8.6%, and that's only going to grow. We need to look at it as an industry that we need to make sure that we nurture, we support, we make sure that it grows, because it has a potential to solve the problem of unemployment in this country. And of course, when you solve that, you're going to impact the economy positively, and you're going to make sure that, the contribution to the GDP from tourism increases from what it is to a higher number. If you look at countries like Thailand, tourism already contributes around 20% of their GDP. Mm-hmm. I think that we can move our GDP contribution to those levels, and we can see a record number of people being employed within the tourism value chain in urban areas and in rural areas, and that can solve youth unemployment. Okay. Now, Mr.
Tshivhengwa, it would be very difficult at this point to suggest whether the easing of the restrictions would entail scaling down on vaccinations, and the issue of vaccine mandates, of course, comes to the fore. Now, vaccine hesitancy in South Africa, I suppose, will scupper efforts to resuscitate the sector. In cases where, the government forces people to vaccinate. But how much of an impact would it have?
Well, what we do know is that a lot of international, source markets for South Africa, they are looking at staying at places where they're going to, encounter people that are fully vaccinated. So what we've been doing in our own sector is to encourage our own employees, those that are in the front line, to be vaccinated so that we can resuscitate the industry. And it's something that everyone who wants to come to the country, the first thing that they ask is that, am I going to be in contact with the people that are vaccinated? How many people within this hotel are vaccinated? Or how many people within the car rental company, within the attraction, and many other aspects of tourism are vaccinated? So for us, it's very important, because trust is the new currency. If the tourists are not trusting us, we are not going to get a fair share of tourists coming into our country. So for us, vaccination is important. We support, that everyone should be vaccinated. But government has to decide in terms of whether it's going to be mandatory or not. And the president have already pronounced on that there are people who are looking into that. And for us, we'll welcome that. We need to go back to work. Events have to go back. And if we continue to be hesitant, we're going to be talking about the same things years after. And we're going to have too many people sitting outside not being employed. So we're going to do right by the economy and by our own people to make sure that we move forward from this pandemic.
Mr. Tshivhengwa, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.